Hello and welcome to Who's the Boss? It's a Star Wars podcast from laughingplace.com. My name is Mike Celestino. I am your host. I am the lead Southern California reporter and editorial director for Star Wars content at Laughing Place. This is episode number 143 of Who's the Boss, and we will be discussing the new episodes of The Mandalorian and Star Wars: The Bad Batch on Disney Plus. For that discussion, I have invited back on the show my friend and fellow Star Wars fanatic, John Bishop Jr. John, thank you for coming back on the show. Thank you for taking some time out of your week to come chat with me about Star Wars. How are you? What's been going on?
I've been doing really great. Have been off the Star Wars beat for a little bit, but getting to talk to you, getting to talk to these fine people, gave me an excuse to get caught up really fast. And I'm glad I did because we had some amazing new Star Wars this week, and it really it reignited the fire. I'm ready to go.
That's very, very true. This was a great week for Star Wars. Boy, oh boy, we have a lot to talk about. So let's get going. Let's dive right into it. We do something on the show called the 5 Star Wars questions. You have done this 3 times previously, so you're up to Star Wars questions level 4. You ready for this, John? Okay.
Oh yeah, ready to go. Ready to go.
The 5 Star Wars questions level 4. Number 1, what is your favorite Star Wars weapon? And if you're selecting a lightsaber or a blaster, please be specific as to its model or owner.
Oh, so my favorite Star Wars weapon is Obi-Wan Kenobi's prequels era first lightsaber, because when Episode 1 came out, my mom bought me and my brother the first Star Wars toy she found, and I ended up with um, Obi-Wan Kenobi's lightsaber, and he ended up with Qui-Gon's, and we kept them forever. Even though we were both grown men at that point, it was just nice. Mom thinking of us when she went to the store and grabbed them.
So when you say Obi-Wan's first lightsaber, does his lightsaber change through the course of the prequels? I think it does, right?
I want to say he has 3.
Okay.
With the third one being the one that he is carrying when he fights Darth Vader on the Death Star.
Gotcha. Okay, so
The first 2 are very similar looking. The third one has a little bit of a departure, much more like Luke's Jedi saber.
Got it. What happens to those previous lightsabers in the story? Why does he? Do we know why he switches to different ones?
The first one is kicked off into the abyss by Darth Vader.
That makes sense.
Or
Yes.
Darth Maul. Pardon me.
Yes, Darth Maul. I remember that.
And then
Phantom Menace, yeah.
he carries the second one throughout. Well, he loses another one, I believe, in during Attack of the Clones. But he has a very similar looking one up until he's Obi-Wan on Tatooine. So
Okay.
it's there's similarities to each, but the first 2 are very, very similar. They're basically color changes, etc.
Gotcha. Very, very good choice that we haven't had before. Obi-Wan's first lightsaber from the prequel trilogy. Number 2, the 5 Star Wars questions, level 4. Which Star Wars actor has had your favorite career outside of Star Wars?
Oh, well, Harrison Ford. I mean, it's kind of cliched, but I am a massive Raiders of the Lost Ark fan. I'm
Yeah.
very excited to see the upcoming Indiana Jones. And I just think he's a pretty brilliant guy, whether or not you're watching him in American Graffiti or on Letterman. He's a pretty interesting guy, and I think everyone thinks he takes himself very seriously, and I think there are times when he does, but I also think he can poke a little bit of fun at himself. And I think when we see Mark Hamill doing his impressions of him, I think that's the fun comes out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Who's not a Harrison Ford fan? That's a great choice. Is there a movie? Let's say you can't pick a Star Wars or Indiana Jones movie. What's another Harrison movie that you love?
This is an obscure pick, but I loved Patriot Games.
Okay.
I really liked him as Jack Ryan. I didn't
Yeah.
necessarily like his other turns as Jack Ryan, but that one was spot on for me. And I also liked Regarding Henry, where he played somebody who was
Yeah.
injured and had to relearn how to talk and walk and all that stuff. That one was a little bit more of a cheese fest, but I just think he is a pretty interesting. I'll put in a final plug for him as the evil drag racer in American Graffiti,
Yeah.
because I just imagine him coming off of the carpentry set and driving to wherever he was, and getting in the car and just being a jerk.
Great choices regarding Henry, by the way, written by J.J. Abrams. Such a weird connection that he came around to doing Star Wars eventually too. Okay, number 3, kind of a similar question, but with directors. So, which Star Wars director, speaking of J.J. Abrams, counts as one of them, has had your favorite career outside of Star Wars?
You know, I really like J.J. Abrams. I enjoyed his
Okay,
Star Trek stuff. I have a blast when he's doing what he does best. But in terms of real cerebral content, um, I don't think that's necessarily his forte. Yeah, I'll stick with
okay.
J.J. Abrams. Yeah, yeah.
Do you like Super 8?
I did. I
That was
love.
a good one.
In my mind, I want to say Steven Spielberg, right? And I know that he was as involved in Lucasfilm Productions as anyone who wasn't getting paid
Yeah,
could be. Um,
right.
and I think that there's a lot of collaboration that happened off of the page with he and George Lucas. So, it's tempting to say George Lucas because I love American Graffiti so much,
Yeah.
but I've paid for a lot more J.J. Abrams flicks in the last few years, and Ryan Johnston is not quite there yet. I
Okay.
love his stuff. I
Mhm.
love his 2 movies. I enjoy much of what he's done, but J.J. Abrams is somebody that I feel like, had he been given the reign to all 3 movies, we might have had a little bit more cohesive unit. Um, Certainly, he doesn't necessarily do well on his third flicks in a trilogy, and that those or this, he doesn't do well in his second foray into many of his sequels. But I would have liked to have seen what his vision was from art to end.
Yeah, yeah, I get what
Even
you're
though, I
saying.
mean, the Last Jedi is one of my favorite Star Wars
Yeah.
movies. It's just I wanted to see more from Ryan Johnston.
No, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I think, there's something to be said for having, like you said, a cohesive vision across the trilogy. I think many people would agree with that for sure, even though, I am a fan of both Ryan Johnson's and J.J. Abrams, as individuals. So let's go to number 4 now. This is, again, kinda thinking outside of the Star Wars box. Which is your favorite Star Wars reference or Easter egg in other media? So, could be from a TV show or a movie or a video game, anything where they've referenced Star Wars. Do you have one that sticks out to you?
Yes, again, I'm going to be cliched. Sorry, guys, I'm old. Um, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where R2D2 and C3PO are on the walls of the map room, that is high geekdom for me, and something I'm always looking for, and something I'm always really enjoying.
That's a perfect one. I think, when it comes my turn to answer these questions, that might be the one that I go with as well. It gives such a great connection between the 2 major Lucasfilm franchises, so that's such a perfect choice. Number 5, the 5th and final of the 5 Star Wars questions. Level 4, what is your favorite? Okay, and I know where you're gonna go with this one. This is an easy one, considering what you've already said. What is your favorite Lucasfilm project outside of the Star Wars franchise?
All right, well, indie is obviously my bag, but I will say that if I'm going off the board, one Lucasfilm project that doesn't get enough love is the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, especially the box set that came out a few years ago that included um, a lot of history and
Yeah,
documentaries and a lot of really great stuff. If I was teaching um, lower level history, I think
yeah,
that would be a great entry point for a lot of, especially young men who often find sitting down and listening to teachers drone on, not so great. And, getting them into the excitement and fascination that I have with history, much of which was introduced at first by Raiders of the Lost Ark
Yeah.
and things like that. I love Young Indie Chronicles, and I would love to see it around an awful lot more.
Yeah, agreed. And I have those box sets, and I haven't gone through all those documentaries. There's such a wealth of content there
It's
that they
so
really,
much.
yeah,
Yeah,
they put
yeah,
a
it's
lot of
so
effort
much.
into, yeah, exactly like you said, like giving educators the opportunity to kind of work this into their lessons. And yeah, if you really do want uh, history 101 tour of early 20th century Earth. It's not just America, because Indy is obviously globetrotting across the globe. And yeah, I would love to, just if I had a lot of time, just sit down and go through all that stuff, because you could learn about all the important historical figures that Indy meets along his journeys, all the cities and locations. Just so cool. They did a wonderful job. I think Rick McCollum, the producer, was
Hmm.
heavily involved with putting all that together. So very
And they
cool
even
to,
got Harrison Ford to come in for one. So
right, right.
I mean, it's so crazy. That particular episode is a little crazy, but um, I I just think the other thing is, as somebody who was a history major, they're spot on with some of the attack or some of the takes they have on colonialism
Yeah.
and how other cultures are treated within the Western world. Amazing that they were thinking of those things way before a lot of people were currently. So I'm excited. I'm so excited for the new Lucas Museum that's going to be in Los Angeles. I hope
Yeah.
to come and visit that with you, Mike,
That'd be
next time
great.
I'm out there, and
Please.
we could take a look and really see how, if they were able to take that love of history and put it into a physical form.
It might be a couple years, I think, before that's
Hmm.
finished, unfortunately. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
please,
so too.
as soon as they do finish it, please come out. I'll be happy to go there with you. Let's say hi to a commenter here. Sonia Pantoja. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Says hi there, guys. I love the Mandalorian season 3 and little baby Grogu. He's so adorable. Of course, we agree with that, and we are going to be talking about the Mandalorian in a bit here. But the next thing that I want to do is go to an interview, actually. So if you're watching this live, we are live on the Laughing Place YouTube channel. You're not going to hear this interview. But if you're listening to this podcast later on in audio form, you will hear an interview that I did with author Sam Maggs, and she wrote the new novel Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars, which takes place between the video games Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I had a great 20 plus minute chat with Sam Maggs. She was really kind. I was really happy that she was able to take some time out to speak with me about the book and her writing career in general. So let's listen to my interview with Sam Maggs. Here we go. Okay, that was my discussion with Sam Maggs, the author behind the new novel Star Wars Jedi Battle Scars. You can pick that up right now. It's already available. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend, if you're a fan of the video game Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Have you played that game, John?
My video game expertise really ended with Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis.
Okay, so a while ago.
So, but I have the patience enough to watch my children play video games,
Yeah,
and they loved Fallen Order. I loved the character. I loved what they did.
yeah.
I thought it was really interesting, and I'm very excited to see what they can do with the character going forward. I'm very aware that the way I experience Star Wars is much different than my children.
Mm.
They learned about Star Wars through that video game and through
Okay.
cartoons. And so they're not coming at it in the same way I am, and they have much different attachments to characters than I do, which is great. I think it's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah, everybody has a different, especially like as we get through the different generations here,
Yeah.
everybody's going to have a different entry point into the Star Wars franchise. But this book, Battle Scars, is just a great way to kind of bridge the narrative gap between these two games, with the third game, Jedi Survivor, coming out at the end of next month, at the end of April. So you've got about a month to, or a little about a month and a half actually, to read this novel and get caught up on what the crew of the let's see, what is the name of the ship? The Stinger or something? In the Jedi Fallen Order game, what they're up to in between the games, and that'll lead you right into the second game. So go out and check out that novel. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too. Okay, let's get into some Star Wars headlines for the week. This is just stuff coming out of a galaxy far, far away since our last recording session. The big news that kind of broke through the trades, the entertainment industry trade publications this week, we kind of found out, this leaked out through, from Lucasfilm, that two of the movies that were in development, specifically the ones that were going to be made by Patty Jenkins, which was the Rogue Squadron movie, and then Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios, was also developing a movie. Those are no longer in active development. So as of right now, it doesn't seem like those movies are going to be made. But the other thing that came along with that was that Taika Waititi is still developing his movie and apparently is planning on starring in it as well, which is interesting. He has starred in his own films before. He played, I think, the lead role in What We Do in the Shadows, the mockumentary about vampires that I really enjoyed. John, what do you think of this news? Any thoughts on all this coming out of the trades?
Well, I wonder, because I haven't really seen this said anywhere. I wonder how much the success of Top Gun 2 played into not being able to do Rogue Squadron anytime soon, because the best Star Wars Squadron movie has already been done. It just happened to have F-18s
Right.
and involved Tom Cruise. I mean, the whole setup, the whole way they handled it, it was an incredibly Star Warsy film, and I enjoyed it immensely. My children enjoyed it immensely, and after coming out of it, I remember saying to myself, how is she going to top that? And I also think that it's very difficult, even just on the open premise of it, to do a Star Wars Squadron movie without having it attached to a particular era. And I think one of the things that Star Wars cinematically is handling toughly, not very well, is what to do next, how
Yeah.
to get themselves back on the big screen with something that is groundbreaking and something that people are actually going to want to watch. I am a sequel lover. I enjoyed all of them. I have no problems rewatching any of it. But I think I'm going to have trouble with another Star Wars movie that doesn't necessarily have Rey in it, or doesn't
Okay.
necessarily have Luke in it, or doesn't. I am, in this particular era of Star Wars, enjoying it. I did not necessarily love all of what I was reading in the High Republic.
Hmm.
So I'm of a different generation though,
Yeah.
and again, I'm trying to be open-minded and be excited, and everything that I've seen on television, I've enjoyed. And I was a huge fan of the Old Republic, and I was hoping perhaps we would hear something new about that down the road, maybe, and maybe some of the Acolyte stuff will connect to some of those things. But that's all. It's very exciting stuff. But I wasn't surprised on either of these things.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
No, I think you're right. Yeah, these are kind of, they are newsworthy, but we already kind of had assumed that these projects were kind of falling by the wayside. It just hadn't really come out officially, and it's still not officially announced by Lucasfilm. But the fact that these are out through the pretty reliable trade
the
publications
trades.
like
Yeah,
Hollywood Reporter, Variety, or Deadline reporting on these things, it's pretty much taken as fact from them. I doubt Lucasfilm will ever comment on it. It'll just kind of be forgotten. There are many, as you look back on the last decade of Lucasfilm, there are many projects like this that have been announced and then never came to fruition. But yeah, like you, I am curious to see what they're going to settle on as to what the next theatrical Star Wars movie is going to be, whether it's that one that Damon Lindelof is co-writing or the Taika Waititi one. I guess we'll find out. Maybe there'll be some kind of announcement at Star Wars Celebration Europe, which is a great segue into our next topic here, which is there was announcements regarding Star Wars Celebration, which is coming up in less than a month now in London. John, I ask you this, I feel like every time there's a celebration. Am I going to see you at this year's Star Wars Celebration?
no, I have 3 children under 12, under
Yeah.
under 14 years old, all of whom need dad home at this point.
Okay.
And I am very excited to get to one that is in Anaheim or in Florida someday, perhaps with one of my children in tow,
That'd be
which would
great.
be great. Uh, and maybe you can give me an update. Are they going to live stream as much as they have in the past? Because that was one of the major disappointments I've had, particularly from a reporting standpoint, that I couldn't watch what all of you were watching down there, and I felt that that was rather unfair to a lot of us, at
Yeah.
least even on tape delay. So,
So yeah, that's part of the good news coming out of this week is that not only did we get the schedule of the panels for Star Wars Celebration, but they did announce a live stream. Now, I don't know if it's going to be 100% of everything that's going to be live streamed, but it certainly seems like they're going to be playing a lot on that live stream. I'd have to look into it further, or I don't know if they've even announced exactly what and where will be live streamed. But I know there was a rumor floating that nothing was going to be live streamed. So at least
mm,
we have this going for us. In addition to that, they also announced a couple more guests coming to Star Wars Celebration this year. Michelle Ong, who plays Omega, she voices Omega on The Bad Batch, and Simon Cassianides, who plays Axe Woves, who I think was only in one episode of The Mandalorian. They're going to both be there signing autographs, taking photos with people. But yeah, I think if you are not able to make it to Star Wars Celebration, at the very least, you will have that live stream. I know they're going to be doing the regular updates with the familiar folks over there from the Star Wars YouTube channel, Kristen Baver and
she's
the
the
other
best.
folks.
I love her.
Yeah,
She's awesome.
she's
Yeah,
really great on This
yeah.
Week in Star Wars. So you can look forward to that. And John, I'm very sad that I won't see you there, but if you're out there listening, I hope that I run into you if you are going to this as well. I will be there, and it looks like I'm going to be on stage for the first time too, so that should be interesting. Stay tuned for more information about that. Some other, I guess I would say, concerning news coming out of this week is that down at Walt Disney World, the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser has reduced its voyages to 2 a week. So I believe previously it was going out 3 times a week, and that's over the course of 48 hours. So they were able to squeeze in 3 each week, and now it's down to 2. There's been a lot of news like this recently concerning the Galactic Star Cruiser. I don't know, John. I don't. From what I know about you, you haven't done the Galactic Star Cruiser,
No, but I
right?
have watched everything that everyone has done,
Yeah.
and I'm I'm of the opinion that some of this goes back to the decision to put Galaxy's Edge in the era it's in.
Hmm.
When they decided that they weren't going to do Tatooine and have Tatooine be the backdrop of Galaxy's Edge, or what it would, Star Wars Land back.
Right.
I have it on good authority that at some point Bob Iger pulled the Imagineers aside and said, we are going to do something that attaches to the current era of Star Wars that we just spent $4 billion on, and not.
I've heard that too.
Yeah, and the Imagineer who spoke to me, I think was a little taken aback by that, and I think a lot of people were really sad by that. I am of the opinion that Galaxy's Edge is awesome. I've read all the novels. I love everything
Yeah.
attached to it. I've walked around and experienced a lightning storm in the middle of a Star Wars landscape, and it was phenomenal. I'm excited to see the one in Los Angeles. I also understand why some people coming there, are wondering where Darth Vader is,
Right.
or where's Luke Skywalker. And I think that there's ways and creative ways to fix that. But in terms of the Galactic Star Cruiser, there's only so many of us around,
Yeah.
and there's only so many of us who have the wherewithal or the means to
Right.
plop down that much money for a Star Wars cosplay experience that is, once in a lifetime, yes,
Yeah.
but also something that is a very unknown entity. Like when you're having to make a decision on what you're going to do with your children for their vacation once a year, you don't want any guesswork. And I
Yeah.
think that if you're not you or I going to Galactic Star Cruiser is probably a stretch, and probably for good reason. And that's not
Yeah.
to disparage anything that's been done. I think I think it's really amazing. I think it's really expensive. I think it's really expensive to build a lightsaber at Walt Disney World.
Yeah.
But all of these things, in comparison to the other things you can do, it's a $300 lightsaber, or you go see the Red Sox for $300. It's comparable. It's a
Sure.
and I just think that people are not sure necessarily what to do with their discretionary income, and they usually go to certain things. I also wonder if the spaces within the Galactic Star Cruiser are going to be used for parties, just like the old. One of the reasons why the Great Movie Ride stuck around for so long is that they sold corporate
Right.
corporations the ability to go and have a massive party in the middle of Munchkin Land.
Right.
So I wonder if at some point they're just going to make sure that there's no crossover between the people who are trying to experience it, and allow people to come in at parties and cocktails
Yeah.
and be served by a Twi'lek and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, you make a lot of really great points. Like you, I also love Galaxy's Edge, and I've done Galactic Star Cruiser. As you know, I didn't pay for it; it was paid for by my work, which was really, really lucky. I
hmm
was very, very fortunate that I got to do it that way, and do it the way that I did, where I fully committed and I feel like I got really the most out of it that's possible. And I kind of agree that repeat the idea of doing like repeat visits is very, I mean, it's limited. There is an appeal to go back and try to do some of the paths that I haven't taken before, but for that kind of money, it does feel like a once in a lifetime thing. So once they get through all the really devoted Star Wars fans who do have the money to do that, you have to wonder like where else are they going to get guests for this thing? I know they reduced the cast member or they increased the cast member discount, so cast members could go for like half price basically, and I think that helped out a little bit. But how much you're going to rely on your own employees to come and populate it? But yeah, I hope they figure out a good way to use that space that they've already built in a long-term solution, because I do think it is a really interesting idea that maybe financially wasn't feasible just in the long term. It's a pretty daring experiment, and it was always going to be a gamble, I think. But very curious to see where that goes as time goes on. Comic books this week. There were three. Last week there were six, so three is actually not that many. Star Wars: The High Republic #6, Sana Staros #2, and Bounty Hunters #32. I've read two of these so far and enjoyed them. Very good. My reviews are going up at laughingplace.com. How about you, John? Have you been keeping up with any of the Marvel or not IDW anymore, Marvel or Dark Horse Star Wars comics?
I got to be honest with you. I was a little freaked out when they stopped with IDW,
Yeah,
and I had invested so much um, in terms of time and money getting into those comics,
right.
and then I really didn't like some of the overarching themes that were going all over um, all of this, the several different major arcs, and
Uh-huh.
I at some point I was just like, I am a little overwhelmed, and
Sure.
I'm not getting any of this stuff paid for. So a lot, it was a tax write-off, sure, but
Yeah.
on the flip side, I'm still trying to shell out. Um, you know, uh, God, I remember it was like $30 a week or something like that, and
Yeah, it's a lot.
again, you have to make your decision. Am I gonna buy, um, Disney Plus, or am I gonna read six comics? Well,
Yeah.
that decision's made for me because my children watch Disney Plus, and I really enjoyed certain of the comics, but not all of them as much. But I was trying to be as a completist. I was trying to keep up with everything, and then finally was like, "Ugh, I don't think I can do this," and I kind of I took a break. I do
Okay.
intend to get back in, and I'm hoping that there's much more kind of like cohesion between those things and what we're seeing on screen in a real
Yeah.
minute to minute sense.
Yeah, I think I've heard from a lot of people like you who just kind of got overwhelmed and have taken a break from it. I've also heard from people who recommended doing Marvel Unlimited, which is a subscription service where you log in and you can browse through a whole archive of comics. The problem there is they don't get the comics until I think a month or two later. Doesn't
That's
suit
right.
my
Yep.
purposes for reviewing them, but that might be a good way to do it, to kind of just, if you don't mind waiting, you can go in and read them that way. Like you, I am a completist though, and I like having the paper issues. I like putting them in my box and taking up more and more space in my apartment. So I'll continue doing it this way. But yeah, I totally get why it would just be too much for some people. But they must be making money. I'll say that, and I'm glad.
Of course.
I'm glad
Yeah.
that they are making money, because they wouldn't keep making them, this many of them, if they weren't profitable for Marvel. So hopefully, hopefully they're paying their creatives well. That's all I can say, I guess. Let's do a little quick merchandise roundup coming out of this past week. I was really excited to see a new Mandalorian Lego set announced. It's the Pirate Snub Fighter from the season premiere episode last week. So one of those little pirate
Mm-hmm.
attack starfighters and two pirate minifigures. Sadly, neither of the minifigures is Pirate King Gorian Shard, who
Pizza the Hut.
a green Pizza the Hut, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we'll get him eventually. Hasbro has announced more retro collection figures for the Book of Boba Fett, which is great. I know those retro style figures are very popular. And then there's a box set vinyl records of the John Williams score for the original Star Wars film, the 40th anniversary. Wait, 40th anniversary. We're a little late on that, aren't we? Did I write that? Yeah. That must be a re-release of the 40th anniversary set, which would have come out in 2017. So it looks cool. I saw the pictures of it. Ravensburger, the toy company, is putting out a puzzle collection based on the card game or the board game Villainous, which has a Star Wars edition called Power of the Dark Side, I think, and that looks real. The puzzles look really cool. You can find all this stuff over at laughingplace.com. Also coming out this past week were new character posters inspired by the season premiere of The Mandalorian, and the two characters we got this week were the Armorer and the Anzellan Droidsmiths. Do you think one of those, have we established yet whether one of those Anzellans was Babu Frick?
Oh, it has to be.
Okay.
I hope it's the one that he squeezed really, really hard,
Right.
because that was one of the highlights of the first week for me. I just thought that was the cutest, because you want Grogu to be cute. You want him
Yes.
to do cute things. You don't always want him kicking ass. And at that, I laughed heartily at that one. I think I woke up the house. I was watching it late, so
Right.
good stuff.
Good stuff. Lastly, in Star Wars headlines, there's a photo going around of Pedro Pascal standing next to the Mandalorian costume from Disneyland. Although the photo wasn't taken at Disneyland, it was at the Mandalorian launch event that happened in Hollywood last week. I just thought it was interesting to see, the Mandalorian from the park next to the real life Mandalorian Pedro Pascal. And that was just you can find that photo over at Laughing Place if you want to check it out. But that's going to be the end of Star Wars headlines for this week. And that's going to bring us to our first main topic, which is The Bad Batch. Star Wars The Bad Batch. It's an animated series on Disney Plus. We had a new episode this week called The Outpost. Let's start off by asking you, John, what's your history with The Bad Batch? And what did you think of season 2 so far before this week's episode?
Well, I was one of the crazy people who saw the original Clone Wars movie in theaters 2 or 3 times. So my history with Clone Wars and Bad Batch goes back as far as it could. And yes, I fought in the Clone Wars just like your father. That, that I heard that line when I was 2, and so the idea of finding out how we get from here to there appeals to me in a massive way. And every time I watch this, I fall more in love with the family, that the found family aspect of it. I think Omega is amazing. I think she's a groundbreaking character. I hope very much that we learn much more about her.
Yeah.
And I enjoy every episode. I'm not one of those people who loses their mind over filler or
Right.
for exposition is
I want to interrupt.
necessary in
Can I
art.
interrupt right there? I saw a great tweet the other day, and it was like, I think it said like, people complaining about filler episodes. You're just complaining about it being a TV show, because that's what TV is. You have to have that kind of an episode. I won't even call it filler. I will call it, yeah, there has to be that kind of episode in there, because there's too much time to literally fill up. You have to have episodes where it's more about the characters and less about moving the plot forward. Anyway, please continue.
Well, no, but so I listen to a daily podcast about World War II, and
Okay.
it's excellent. And this podcast, there's moments, there's days where nothing memorable happened in World War II that day, but all of the
Yeah.
stuff that is happening is setting up the more
Right.
important stuff, you
Yeah.
know? So at some point, like, I feel like there's a couple things going on. I don't think people like to think, and it really bugs me because those of us who had to grow up reading books, well, we had to think. So,
Right.
when I have media that makes me think or makes me wonder why are they doing this or what is going on here or what is the creative person behind this trying to tell me, I'm enjoying that. I'm not necessarily enjoying every single one,
Sure.
but I'm going to dive in. I'm going to enjoy the fact that we have new Star Wars on a given day, which we didn't have for vast portions of
Yes.
my life.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to get too mad about a filler episode. Give me singing droids any day.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I'm fine with it. I love it. I love all of this. I want to know why there's a dent in Boba Fett's helmet. I want to know, why Omega's hair doesn't ever grow. I want to know.
I think there's a barber on Ord Mantell that she's going to or something.
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
I'm enjoying
No.
it, and when it gets deep, like it did in this
Yes.
episode,
Right.
well, I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say, wow, this reminded me of X, Y, and Z, and I'm really enjoying it. And then this
Right.
is not what I expected when I was watching this tonight, and I was pleasantly surprised about how hard this one hit, and how much I cared because for
Yeah.
a long time I didn't give a crap about what was going on with Crosshair, and now I'm like, oh,
Right.
that poor guy.
Exactly. So yeah, you make a great point. I think you do care more about the characters having spent more time with them, even
Mhm.
if some of those episodes are going to be what people will derisively call filler. But this week's episode, I don't think anyone's calling it filler because it was such
No.
a major turning point in the Bad Batch. Let's talk about this week's episode. It's called The Outpost. John, what were your overall opinions about this installment of the Bad Batch?
Okay, so anytime you're watching a television show and you're physically angry that it ends,
Yeah.
well, they did a good job, right?
Right.
So it's 11:30 or last night. I finally got to watch it. All my kids were asleep, and I needed to focus because I needed to talk to my friend Mike the next day. And I'm like, what do you mean? That's it? That's it? What? And so when you step back and you feed the cats and you're just, well, what was that? Well, they did their job. They did a great job, and I was
Yeah.
really, really into it the entire time. I thought that repositioning and pivoting with Crosshair, which I think was happening earlier in the season,
Yeah.
this moment where he seems to be more like the man that we met when they were together.
Yeah.
I even think he was wearing the same uniform,
Okay.
and so I the only thing I didn't like was the villain. That guy sucked. He was boring. He was one dimensional. I wanted to have a little bit more depth
Okay.
when he makes his turn.
He was a little bit of a cartoonish villain. That's a very good point. But yeah, to what you were saying earlier in the season, I think they were setting up the idea of Crosshair kind of feeling like an outcast in the Empire. where he didn't really fit in among the other clones. He didn't fit in with certainly the new stormtroopers they're bringing in. He just felt like a man unto himself because he didn't want to leave the Empire. He still felt that sense of
Untethered,
duty.
Mike. Untethered.
Yeah, untethered. And then this week really pushed him over the edge. I do agree that I was on the edge of my seat as well. What would you say is the plot of this episode? Just the broad strokes for folks who may not that we want to spoil it for anybody, but I'm hoping if you're listening to this, I'm hoping you've watched it already. John, go
Well,
ahead.
I mean, I'm sure you read Heart of Darkness at some point in your
Yeah,
and or seen Apocalypse Now.
Apocalypse Now. Yeah,
And so I thought that what we were seeing was a person's complete juxtaposition and understanding that what he believed to be the truth or what he understood to be what he was doing was completely false. And that he was going to have to, at some point, make a decision to do something other than what he had been doing, which was following orders. And
right.
it was, I thought it was very powerful. I thought they did a great job with the one clone who was left over, because they could have gone completely awry with that.
Mhm.
They could have made him into a, something out of Treasure Island, like this castaway,
Right.
crazy person. But they didn't.
So
Everything
you're
he
talking
did,
about Mayday, right? Is
Mayday,
that the one?
Mayday, and
Yeah.
so Mayday, reminded me of some of those castaway figures that you run into in some literature. But he was so tethered to the ethos of the clones that he was this grounding point
Yeah.
that allowed me to enjoy what I was seeing in the character development of Crosshair even more.
Yeah. Loved meeting that character and getting his perspective, and then seeing the impact that he has on Crosshair after they've started working together on this at this outpost where we get the title of the episode from. On Did they ever give us the name of this planet? I don't think so. This kind of frozen snowy planet. And yeah,
I almost
what
wondered if it was the proto Starkiller base, but
oh,
I had
yeah.
that in the back of my head, like, oh, and especially after they were essentially guarding cargo. Well,
Yeah.
why is this cargo here? What are they doing with
Okay.
cargo? Why is this turning into an outpost of some port?
Mm.
So in my mind, I was like, my head cannon was going, whoa! So,
So yeah, Star Killer Base would have started out as the planet Ilum, right? That's where they
mhm.
went and got the crystals for the lightsabers in the Clone Wars cartoon. So let's talk a little bit about Crosshair a little bit more. Obviously, he really dug in his heels in the previous season about being committed to the Empire. And then finally we see his breaking point at the end of this episode. What do you think it was that specifically finally pushed him over that edge?
Well, we've all had that moment when we're dating somebody, and our idea of
Yes.
that person
Okay.
is quite different than the actual.
That's a
And
very good observation. Yeah.
and so when and I guess I'm allowed to talk about spoilers, when they
Yeah.
open up the cargo and it's stormtrooper uniforms and the complete understanding of what he represents to the Empire, which is a bygone era, a
Yeah.
failure, um, and something that's about to be swept aside, I think comes to him incredibly quickly. Whereas a lot of people around him are seeing it, a lot of people around him are saying it. You know, it's just like when you have your buddy and you're like, man, he or she is not very nice. I don't know why you're staying with them. You know, you might want to, I don't know, rethink this.
Yeah.
And suddenly she doesn't, he or she doesn't show up, for your birthday party with 30 people waiting, and you come up and you're like, all right, well, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's not the
Right.
way it's supposed to be. So that is, I imagined it as Crosshair's breakup with the Empire.
Yeah.
going to go burn the box of goodies that they have, that the Empire gave him previously. It's done.
It's done. Yeah. So this episode has that shocking ending where we see Crosshair shoot that officer, Lieutenant Nolan, the villain who you didn't care for.
Yeah, the
Uh,
villain from the Aha videos.
oh,
The
right.
take on me guy.
um, and yeah, we don't really know after this point what the consequences are going to be, except we do get this little scene of Crosshair waking up at the facility that I believe is Mount Tantus, where they're
Mhm.
doing all this cloning experimentation. And there's this character, Emery Carb, voiced by Keisha Castle Hughes, who is kind of looking over Crosshair. She injects him with something, I think. What do you think is happening there? What do the cloners want with Crosshair, in your opinion?
I think and I don't think Lucasfilm has this all mapped out correctly yet.
Uh-huh.
But I think that because we keep seeing cloning in the series in different ways, shapes, and forms, is that we're trying to backfill the somehow Palpatine
Uh-huh.
survived. I
Yes.
think they know that was, if there was a one line in any Star Wars movie that I would expunge, that line. And so they can't go back and do that. So they need to backfill with something meaningful, which means they have to be working on cloning the entire time so they get it right to clone the Emperor.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I think it is. I don't think it's overly complicated. I do think there's going to be missteps. I wouldn't shock me if they regurgitate. Remember that wasn't there a zombie army stormtrooper novel back in the day?
Oh
It
boy.
wouldn't
Yeah.
shock me if they try to splice the genes of that crazy you know kaiju with
Yeah, the Zillow Beast.
yeah, like I could see that happening. That would be a really bad filler episode, maybe. But I definitely see that they're trying to come to grips with what they've done in the past with cloning, what they're what this awful fate that seems to be coming for Crosshair,
Yeah.
and how do we kill off the Bad Batch, because they really can't survive. Sorry,
Right.
they can't survive. So what's going to be the end game? Well, I think Boba Fett's sister survives, and she ends up in the Mandalorian season 8, and
Okay.
and uh, you know, I just feel like there will have to be some ending to this, and that ending may be the boys trying to go and find their brother, and it doesn't work out. And so I'm sorry to be the bummer. I love these guys too,
Right.
but at some point they cease to exist. I think in the universe, and they're not going to crop up in the the prequels or the sequels or whatever. So
There's so many characters like that in the current Star Wars canon where I'm just thinking like, well, where are these people during the original trilogy? Like they have to die before we get to
yeah,
that point, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
gonna be a
And
bummer
people,
ending no matter what. Yeah.
yeah, and here's a spoiler that you'd be shocked by, Mike. I have wanted to spend 3 days watching all of Andor, so I have not watched. I don't know. I have
Oh,
no idea what happens.
wow.
Believe it
Wow.
or not.
I am
I
shocked by
did
that.
that on
Yeah.
purpose because I want that space. But from what I understand, the realism and the day-to-day nature and you could pluck these characters and put them in World War
Mhm.
II,
Yeah.
that appeals to viewers. So, if you're going to be real about what happens to the Bad Batch, you have to have some end game,
Yeah.
and perhaps they, this is their end game that's coming.
Yeah, it's a dark reality that a lot of people are gonna have to face. We'll find out what happens with that eventually. The
Yeah.
other big thing I wanted to talk to you about in regards to this episode, I started noticing a pattern with this season of The Bad Batch where I think my 3 favorite episodes of this season have been the ones that did not have The Bad Batch in them. I think, I have my own theories. I think specifically I would say like, okay, the characters of Hunter, Wrecker, and Tech are maybe a little too broad for me as a viewer. they have been building out their depth. They have been making them a little bit more fleshed out recently, I will say, but they started out to me as very 2D characters, and maybe that's why I don't care for them as much. But what do you think, John? There was that first Crosshair episode in this season that was great, and then there was the one that took place all on Coruscant with the Senator and the clone conspiracy. I also really love that one. And then this week's episode, I would name those as my three favorites of the season, and they don't have the characters that we know as the Bad Batch in them. Why else would you think that would be?
I would agree with that, Mike. Did you ever watch Cheers?
Yes, love Cheers. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So didn't Sam and Diane get kind of old after a while?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when they went off and they did stupid things with Cliffy or Norm or
Right.
whomever, you were just like, all right, this is funny. I'm
It's
really
like
excited.
a breath of fresh air. Yeah.
It's a breath of fresh air. And, every time I see the three of the, it's three men and a baby or three men and a clone, and, like they're trying to get, her, Omega from here to there, and it's same. She's always falling. They're picking her up, and she's obviously the smartest one in the bunch, and they should just do whatever she tells them to do. Anyway, I was very pleased to not necessarily be in the ship with them, lamenting the demise of Camino and trying to figure out what they're supposed to do next.
Okay.
I've had it with their handler,
Sid, yeah.
yeah, she can go away. And I just feel as if that we've earned a resolution here, and if these other things are pushing us towards that resolution of what I think is a really terrific set of circumstances and a really awesome side bar to
Mhm.
the Clone Wars, I'm excited for it. I don't think they should push it too much farther.
Right.
I'm very excited to see what happens down the road. And maybe perhaps Omega becomes her own thing at some point. I think she'd be a really interesting character that could wear a mask and be easily hidden throughout the Galactic Civil War, and perhaps come up some other time.
Mhm.
But the other guys, I think they're close to the end of the line.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I just think, to me, the show is able to take itself a little bit more seriously when those other characters aren't around. The ones I listed off, like Wrecker especially feels like comic relief, and then Tech has always felt to me like a little bit like Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like he's kind of
Yes, very
the
good. Yeah. Mhm.
the robot character, though he's not a robot, obviously. And people have pointed out the connections between Tech and being on the autism spectrum, stuff like that, which is
Yep.
fantastic to see that kind of representation. But they are a little broader. And I do think Crosshair and his arc, especially this season, has been more appealing to me, just in the way that the show handles itself when he's the focus, I guess.
Yeah. When's the last piece of dialogue you remember from Hunter?
I don't remember any of his dialogue.
Right. And
Yeah.
technically, he started off as the character I thought was the most interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but now I'm so far beyond on that. I just want to see what Omega finds whenever they get into that vault,
Yeah.
and we'll
Yeah.
see. I think
We'll
I think
see.
it'll be fun to see.
I do too, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. Speaking of which, is there anything that you're hoping to see or expecting to see in the remainder of season 2? Let's see. This was episode 12, so there are 4 episodes left in the Bad Batch season 2. What are you looking forward to or hoping to see?
I would like to see a fleshing out of a solid connection to any of the other major thoroughfares in
Okay.
the saga. I, the Skywalker saga is, that's one thing, and I'm not necessarily expecting like a dramatic connection, but
Mhm.
I would like to see something that plays itself out in either the movies or a future
Oh,
program.
okay.
Um, and I'm not and I'm fine with it if they have one more season of this. I'm fine with them setting it up. I hope it's good. But I would like to see the beginning of the end game become more real.
Okay. Yeah, that's the other thing we don't really know, is whether the Bad Batch is returning after this. I don't think they've said anything about a season 3,
Nope, I
and
don't think so.
to be honest about my access to the show, I do have screeners. I have seen the next couple episodes, but they didn't give us the finale, and I think that's probably for a reason. Like, as a critic, I didn't have access to the finale, or that 2-part finale that's coming up at the end of the month. So I'm guessing something big probably happens there, if I had to put money on it. But yeah, it should be interesting to see what's coming down the pipe for the Bad Batch. But let's move on. Let's talk about I think first of all, let's just wrap up the Bad Batch by saying excellent episode, right? You and I agree on that, right? This is a pretty solid one, that we can recommend people check out if they haven't watched already. Not that we haven't already spoiled it, but a great example of a Bad Batch episode. Let's talk about the Mandalorian. It's chapter 18, the Mines of Mandalore. This is another big one that's getting a lot of interesting discussion on social media that I've seen this week. John, let's start. I know we've talked about the Mandalorian with you before on the show, but
Oh yeah.
let's just give a quick overview. What's your relationship with this show, and what did you think of the season premiere last week?
I didn't have any complaints about the season premiere. I've enjoyed the show immensely.
Yeah,
I've seen where people have had issues, or wondering why it has so much connectivity with the Book of Boba Fett. None of that bothers me in the least. I think
yeah,
that a lot of decisions outside of the creative process are made by marketers, and when people are trying to tell a story that has a beginning and an end, someone else has to figure out how to sell that story to a bunch of people who may not have any care about that to start with.
yeah,
And so, um, taken as a whole, all of that stuff has been really satisfying. I've really enjoyed it. And, you know, from a personal standpoint, do I wish that Grogu had continued to be a Jedi and had stayed with Luke? I actually think I kind of do. I kind of do.
okay,
But that's only because I'm, steeped in Jedi lore, and Luke Skywalker is my guy. Obi-Wan Kenobi are my guys. I love Rey. So, the Jedi have always been the more interesting piece of Star Wars for me. That's not the same for everybody, and
yeah,
certainly it makes for a more interesting story if Grogu is learning to not be a Jedi, but to incorporate his powers within the creed of the way, right? And so I've enjoyed seeing that. I enjoyed the beginnings of seeing that last week,
yeah,
and I really enjoyed it this week. Now that he is able to jump out of fighter jets and into people's arms, and he's not necessarily. Um, I actually think he probably did say Pelly.
you
Like
do,
I think yeah,
in his
because
own
I
way,
think
in his own way.
yeah, I think oh, hi, how are you?
Yeah,
That's him. So I think we're seeing growth, and we at some point to have exponential growth, right? Like he's going to go from 0 to 60 in
right.
terms of Yoda. So it's fun. All of it's been fun, and if you take it as that way, do I think it fits neatly into Star Wars lore all the time? No. And do I wish do I wish that Din would realize he's in a cult? Yes. um, she tells the armorer tells him what to do all the time, and he nearly dies every time.
Yeah,
Probably telling you something, Din. But that's they wouldn't have a story if he figured it out right from the start, right?
that's true. I am really hoping that we get that this season. To skip ahead to what we're hoping for the rest of the season, I really want him to break out of this. What is it called? The Children of the Watch. I think it's time to
The
be
children of the
done with
corn.
that.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, let's get into this week's episode. I thought this was a really solid one. Very moody, very atmospheric. What about you, John? What were your thoughts overall on chapter 18, the Mines of Mandalore?
Well, I was a liberal arts major in college, and I kept thinking back to the allegory cave in
Yeah,
from Plato, and that
right.
both Din and um, Bo-Katan were actually seeing their realities get really, really shook up.
Huh.
And I
Yeah.
think I'm wondering, and I'm hoping that they find a way because those realities are getting shaken up. because maybe Din wakes up and says, "Well, the Armorer tried to kill me again, um, and look who saved me." My
Yeah.
brother, my sister, the people within the greater clan of the Mandalorian who are not so dogmatic. It would be really neat to see how they can resolve the idea of the dark saber and leadership within the Mandalorians, and whether or not they could be setting up our post sequel universe with Mandalore being a thing, right? And
Right.
so, whatever the big threat to the universe that's coming down the road, that maybe, Ray might have something, or Ray's progeny has something to do with it, but maybe the Mandalorians have built themselves back up because of, the new Mandalore, either Bo-Katan or Din. And I'm excited for that. I think that's really amazing storytelling.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love your analogy to the Plato. What was the experiment called?
So the people were they were only ever seeing their own reality
Right.
in shadow, right? And
Yeah.
so they were never getting the complete picture.
Right.
And I think if you put that onto Din and Bo has
Yeah.
never had the complete picture.
Yeah.
Whether because of jealousy or rage or just, she's not the brightest bulb. And then Din, he's been saved by these people,
Yeah.
right? We watched the ceremony really kind of to reflect what Din went through when he first became a Mandalorian, right?
Yeah.
So we understand the narrow vision of both of these characters, and now all Din ever does is show up and help people. And Bo's like, "Why are you doing? What are you? What is your process?" And he can't understand why she just won't take the dark saber and rule, because
Right.
he doesn't care. So I just think it's really interesting that they've got
Yeah.
it. And I'm I'm an old man, and I like romantic stories, and I would love it if there had been some sort of feeling, and maybe we're seeing a family develop. It's not going to happen because
So
nobody
you're
would
you're
allow
a
them to do
shipper
that.
of you're a shipper of Din and Bo-Katan.
I am.
Okay.
I just think they're so neat, and they're so like that yin and yang thing. They're so different.
Yeah.
And to have, and she obviously admires the child. She thinks he's pretty cool, and she's learning from him.
Yeah.
And Din is always doing that. So they have this common understanding of the youngling. Um, I, I just, I think that there's so many ways this could go. It really can't, right? Because that would just be so obvious, or somebody would be so angry about it, and their own ship would, people would lose their mind. But back in the 1940s, this might have been a really beautiful friendship. And so I'm sitting there saying, wow, this is really neat, and I really enjoy this, and I'd like to see this be the thing that propels us into a new era. How cool.
Well,
But
yes, I know what you're saying, and I've seen a lot of people talking about this week. This idea of the potential of a relationship between Din Djarin and Bo-Katan. It brought me back to my days as an X-Files fanatic in the 90s, where
yes, yeah.
I always kind of abstained from the discussion of whether or not Mulder and Scully should be a couple. Like, it wasn't the thing that interested me about the show, but I understood that it was a big part of the fandom, especially among female fans. I mean, obviously you're not a woman, but you're into this idea of a relationship, which I think is fun. But
But
yeah,
see, I would have the argument to say it
yeah,
doesn't matter if it was physical. They were
yeah,
always a couple, Mike. They
right.
always were. So, like, it doesn't matter to me necessarily how they get
Sure,
to
yeah.
that point.
Well,
Um,
about going back to Mulder and Scully, like, to me, they were always, yeah, platonic,
yeah.
right for each other in that way. But I guess the
Hmm.
question became like, do we want them to have like a romantic or a physical relationship? And I just wasn't interested. Like, it didn't bother me when
Yeah.
they
It didn't. It
weren't.
wasn't important to the
Yeah,
anima of the series, right? Yeah.
yeah, and
So
that's
yeah.
kind of how I feel about the relationship between Bo-Katan and Din. But to build on what you were talking about, that also kind of blew my mind a little bit as I was considering what you were saying. is that, they're both having their realities shattered,
Yeah.
but they are both of opposite reality. So now I'm thinking, like, is it possible they may swap roles? Because you have Din Djarin, who, like you said, he keeps being put in danger by doing all these things the armor tells him to do. And then Bo-Katan, to skip ahead to talk about the very, very end of this episode, she sees something that kind of shatters her worldview. This thing that she always thought was a literal myth, the mythosaur living under
Yeah, she
the
saw Santa
living.
Claus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Whoa. Imagine
yeah.
that.
So to me, the look on her face at the end, even though she's in the helmet
Yeah.
in the end of the episode, the look on her face is like, okay, she's going to be a believer now. And is Din Djarin going to have his beliefs shattered? And will we see a role reversal there? I think that's a very interesting thing they could be playing with.
By the way,
So
how cool
yeah,
is Katie Sackhoff? I'm sorry, I got to
so
say
good.
it once.
So good.
She's awesome. Like, what a great addition and crossover. It,
Yeah.
it never ever feels weird to me. It's just so cool. So end of rant there. But
No, yeah, great. Wonderful performance. Loving Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan, both in voiceover and in live action. Like you said, very seamless transition for that character. Let's get into the plot of this episode, though. So it starts out on Tatooine, actually, and we meet up with our favorite starship mechanic, Peli Motto, who you mentioned earlier, and we see her running some scams on Bunta Eve. Well, John, to your knowledge, did we know? Do we know what Bunta Eve is? Like, we knew it was the day that the pod race took place in the Phantom Menace. I think that was all we knew about it. But now we know there's like fireworks in Mos Eisley, and there's
I
looks like
think
there's
it
like
was
street
meant.
races.
I
Yeah.
think it was meant to be sort of like the New Year, right? Because
Okay.
they had. I like. All right. So Lucas is a massive race fan, and they
Yes.
have these massive races on big days in the American calendar, right? So, in my mind, this was always a holiday that happens to be the day that they have their biggest race ever. And so that holiday is, Memorial Day or Christmas Day or what have you. And so to me, it was always just one of those big excuses for people to try to sell a lot of crap and and in their universe. So and even down to the two-headed play-by-play combo, talking about it reminded me of John Madden and whomever calling a football game on New Year's Day, right?
Yeah.
So to me, like, it always made sense that way. I don't think it was ever meant for us to have to get too deeply into it.
Right. Yeah, we get a few more little details now about what entails, what does Buta even entail on Tatooine? And it looks like people are having fun, but Peli is just using it as an excuse to rip people off. And
Hmm.
then Din and Grogu show up, and she kind of rips them off as well by unloading R5D4. Poor R5D4, who has had no luck in the Star Wars universe. It's his time to shine as he gets loaded into the N1 starfighter, and Din takes him out to Mandalore. What did you think of R5's role in this episode?
Well, I think whomever wrote the episode had read some of the canon adjacent stuff
Mhm.
about R5, and it made me laugh when I think that he blew a gasket trying not to be picked for this mission.
Right.
To me, R5, his place in the universe is always in some corner quietly beeping and not having anyone bother him. And so every time he does anything spectacular or right, he ends up thrust into something more scary. And I think he's just sick of it. And so I get this, retired, mailman situation with him. He doesn't want to deliver anything anymore. He's
Right.
done. He just stop. And he
Yeah,
keeps being pushed into this stuff. So it just makes me laugh.
it
I
makes me
really
laugh
enjoy it.
too. I got a big kick out of that, especially Peli's line where she's like, "Oh, he's built for adventure," and you could see like R5's just shaking
Like,
his head.
wow.
And there's that moment where they land on the surface of Mandalore and he sends R5 off into the cave, and I thought for sure this is the
Oh,
last we're gonna see of R5D4. I thought he was
he's
done.
toast. He's toast. You know,
Uh,
and then when he actually found him, I'm like, oh my
yeah,
god, what more can they do to this poor droid?
yeah,
You know,
for sure. But I'm glad he's getting his time in the spotlight. And then rewinding a little bit, I want to talk about. There's a moment where Din and Grogu are approaching Mandalore, and
hmm
he's pointing out on the display of the N1 where all the planets or the planets and moons of the Mandalore system are in relation to each other. And he's explaining
hmm
it to Grogu, who, as you said earlier, he's kind of learning the way of the Mandalorians. But
hmm
to me, this was for the audience. This is for us to know the geography of this star system because it's going to be important. It's important later on in the episode, but I think it's going to be important just for the season as a whole. Did you get the feeling that they were just kind of telling us where all of this stuff was, that like as a Mandalorian 101?
Well, I will tell you that as your resident dummy, I was sitting there saying, how is he getting so close? Oh, so yeah, they
Yeah.
did it for me. So nice work.
Right. But yeah, I like even for myself solidifying, okay, I
Oh, it's
understand
not that
where.
far. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I understand where Concordia is, and I understand where was it Kalevala is the planet where Bo-Katan is moping on her throne. So we just have an idea of how long it takes to get to each place, which I think is
She
some
really
good
does mope well. Yeah, I'd be
some good
doing that too if I had a throne. You
right.
know.
Yeah, you just mope in the throne all the time. Yeah, some good world building there. Okay, so um they get down into the cave. There's the whole thing, the whole process. I don't know. There's some nitpicks to be made. I think I don't want to get into all of it, but I think there's some nitpicks to be made about the process of testing the air to see if it's breathable. Like I was thinking that they open the cockpit. Din gets out. He tells Grogu to hide in his pod, and then just Grogu just like gets back into the cockpit. Like hasn't the air from the planet gotten into the cockpit? I don't think any of that is important. I don't know. Those are just like, uh,
Yeah, that seemed to be somebody really said, we have to make sure that they know it's okay for Grogu to breathe.
right.
And like it got lost in the writing process and nobody
Yeah,
made that edit. Like, well, we gotta get this done. We
exactly.
gotta get this done. Oh, we forgot.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter. Just leave it in there. You
right.
know.
That's neither here nor there, though. I think that can be excused because the rest of the episode around it is so cool. But we get down into the caves. They're looking for the mines. They get attacked by a couple of different residents of this planet, Mandalore. There's a group of what I called troglodytes, but they were actually
Yeah.
called Alamites. That's what Bo-Katan calls them. And these are just like Star Wars cavemen, basically.
The
Um, that
putties. Yeah.
What's that?
Just like those idiots who attack Power Rangers, like
Oh, yeah, and I'm not a
just
Power Ranger guy, so that reference
just
is
there to
lost
be
on me.
dispatched. You know what I mean?
Okay.
They're just
Yes.
there to be dispatched.
Yeah, nobody seems to have trouble defeating them. Both
No.
Din and Bo-Katan fight them in this episode and are able to take them out. But the actual threat that I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about is this crazy, scary creature that lives down at the bottom of I guess they call it the Civic Center. And it lives in this, or it's walking around in this giant mechanical spider robot, and then you see it crawl. It looks like kind of a General Grievous type cyborg as it crawls out of the casing, and then later on we see it's an even smaller being that's encased in that. I love this thing. It's another example. So I said last week I wanted the action figure of Pirate King Gorian Shard, who you called Pizza the Hut.
Oh,
But this week I want the action figure of this guy. I don't know if we know his name. What did you think of this creature, this monster that captures Din Djarin?
I don't know who said it. I want to give credit to Star Wars Explained, and that he said, "Who is this? What is this? Is this somebody? Is this a former Mandalorian that somehow got
Oh.
stuck after the purge in a situation where they had to encase themselves in this thing?" I thought that was interesting.
Mm.
I hadn't thought of the General Grievous because the way that his eye kind of works within the thing is very similar to the Grievous. and then the exposed body parts that are built up on by mechanical stuff. That was really cool. I thought it was very old Star. There was a couple moments where the puppet tearing brought me
Yeah.
back to Empire Strikes Back, where you see Grogu move and he's just doing the Yoda shuffle and you
Yeah.
can't see his feet. Loved it. And
Yeah.
then this particular reminded me of the monks on Return of the Jedi.
Omar Monk. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those guys.
Oh,
So
well, that's a great segue into one of the other topics I want to talk about, because I noticed in the credits of this episode, Phil Tippett and Phil Tippett's studio were credited with some of the VFX work on this episode. And when I saw that, I was like, I know exactly what they did. Because have you seen the movie Mad God?
no, not yet, not yet.
This is Phil Tippett's stop motion animated movie that came out last year. Very interesting movie. I don't recommend it for everyone. It's super dark. My wife did not care for it. I loved it. I kind of loved it.
The cast
It's
left the room.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those movies that your mom's not going to dig it, but
No.
if you're into like weird looking monsters, you'll probably be into it. Anyway, I got to assume that Phil Tippett had something to do with this creature. Do you think I'm on the right track there?
Oh yeah, yeah. And there was moments right there where I was like, they said, "Hey, we're gonna do something special here, and
Yeah.
we want to blow people away. And by the way, we need people to believe that two Mandalorians can't defeat this thing
Yeah.
without using a lightsaber." You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, and so I thought that was a really unique piece of the episode. Also, the simplicity of the of just seeing Grogu move. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't think that was necessary. In my mind, on my immediate, I was like, is Grogu technically a Muppet? And I was like, like that's the kind of stuff I think about, and I was like, oh, that was pretty neat. So,
I
you know,
I, I want to say, to be technically a Muppet, you have to have been created by the Jim Henson Company or the Muppet Studio, but certainly using a lot of those same techniques to bring him to life. And yeah, I'm right there with you on that. I love anytime Puppet Grogu walks around; it gives me such a kick. I also like the noises that Grogu makes. He makes this little noise that just goes like "Badoo."
yeah,
I don't know if you've
yeah,
noticed.
yeah. It's sort of like his punctuation.
Yeah,
Like I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to,
Badoo,
and that you're right.
Badoo.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, love all the Grogu stuff. Also, yeah,
Now,
this is the
am I frozen on your end and
your
have this awful face?
your
That's
image
showing.
is frozen, but I can still. Oh, are you gonna come back? Okay. We lost John there for a minute, so let's wait for his return. And I will end up cutting this out of the final audio version of the podcast. Let's see. I'm gonna text John and see when he's coming back. If anybody has any comments or questions, now would be a good time to throw them at me, and I'll be happy to address them as we wait for John's return. But I do see we have some viewers, so if anybody has anything they want me to talk about or answer, have not cut my hair yet, much to Doobie's chagrin. Let's see, he's coming back, so let's just wait a moment for him. I did get out my Bo-Katan Black Series figure for this episode. I thought that was appropriate. She has a shorter hair from last season, I think, in this figure. You could see there. We're just waiting for John Bishop to come back. I think he lost his connection. There he is. Let's get him back in here. Hi, John.
That's it.
I see you and I hear you. So
Awesome, awesome.
good to go.
You didn't even Tippett.
What's that?
You didn't even need Phil Tippett to get me back.
No, we got you back without the visual effects wizards over there at ILM or the Tippett studio. Let's segue from that. Speaking of Grogu, I did want to talk a little bit about, and you kind of mentioned this earlier. You mentioned how Grogu is being developed ever so slightly as a character. Now he's not talking yet. We still don't really understand what he is saying when he has his little noises, but he did have some autonomy in this episode because he has to go and fetch Bo-Katan. He gets to have this little mini adventure in the center of this outing. So what did you think of his little mini quest, his side quest to go and grab Bo-Katan and bring her back? And how did this advance what we know Grogu is capable of?
I also think that it doesn't necessarily mean that he's advancing at this time. I
Okay.
think it almost means that he might be remembering some
Mm,
things that he's done previously, so that what we're being let in on is that his development and perhaps his PTSD
mm,
has kept him from advancing in terms of not only a Jedi or a Mandalorian, but simply as a being, right? And
right.
so suddenly he has people who trust him and are giving him a little bit of space, and he's feeling confident, like even to
Yeah.
the point where he dispatched one of those troglodytes like that. And so I do think they're telling us something that just like that we're coming to fruition in the Bad Batch, we're coming to fruition here. I
Right.
think that we're going to start to see something really interesting very soon.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's funny that you mentioned the Bad Batch because I think it parallels kind of how the Bad Batch are treating Omega. Omega got to
Yes.
do it a little bit earlier than Grogu did, but Omega is being treated as more part of the team. She's allowed to be in danger and have her own active role in the squad more than she used to. And I think that's going to start happening more for Grogu as well, which I think uh, it resolves a lot of issues that I think people have had with the show. I've seen people complaining that the relationship between Din Djarin and Grogu had gotten a little stale. But I think that they're going to start to be a little bit more of like equal partners as Grogu learns a little bit more about what it means to be a Mandalorian and as he's capable of accomplishing things like this, which I do think it was pretty impressive that he managed to get his way up out of that cave, took care of the, let's see, the Alamite as they're called, and got into the ship. Now I think the implication was that R5D4 did steer him up to Bo-Katan's planet, but happy to see Grogu having his own little baby's day out in this episode. I just thought that was a very fun moment, and it's cool that he cared enough, and it demonstrates that he cared enough to put in that effort to save his father figure. Speaking of um, character development and of care for other characters, I want to talk a little bit about Bo-Katan some more
Mm.
because we saw her go through a big uh another big turning point for her character here. Kind of how we saw Crosshair go through a turning point in the Bad Batch. But Bo-Katan was kind of stuck in this rut. I've seen people joking like, "Oh, is Bo-Katan just sitting in that throne all the time? Or is she like in bed, moping in bed, and then she hears the ship coming and she puts on her armor and goes and sits in the throne." But yeah, we saw as soon as she realized that Din Djarin was in trouble, she snapped out of it. She snapped into action and she was willing to go down to the surface of the planet and rescue him not once but twice. So let's get into that a little bit. John, what do you think about the arc that we've seen of Bo-Katan so far in this season?
Yeah, it occurs to me that a lot of these people who are writing this stuff had English and history degrees that they just had no idea what to do with. And so, you know, Bo Katan reminds me of like the brooding of Achilles, right? Like he
Yeah.
doesn't like that something's happened, so he sits around and sulks until everybody tells him, "You got to go do this," right? And it's not unusual for a warrior type to have troubles when their ability to wage war has been stripped of them, right? So, y- y- you know, I'm not going to tell you that I think Bo Katan is the most well developed character ever, but I think that they're doing their best to bring a lot of what we saw in previous series and previous episodes to the front.
Yeah.
So she can't just completely acquiesce and go help um, the Mandalorian every time. Like she can't just help Din every time. So you get this big stage show where she's about to go yell at Din for showing up again, and then as soon as she realizes Din's in trouble, she goes and helps him,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
they have to play that dance, or else it's boring and stupid. But they have to have her be doing something, and that something needs to be stationary. So brooding, it makes sense, whatever.
Yeah. Exactly. Totally agreed on that. We also got some more. So Bo-Katan gives both Din and Grogu and the audience a little bit of a history lesson of her family and the planet Mandalore. Now, she talks about her father, and Din says that it sounds like her father was an interesting person. He would like to have met him. Um, I have ashamed to admit I've only seen the Clone Wars cartoon series all the way through once. Is Bo-Katan's father, to your knowledge, is he a character in that show? Have we met him before anywhere?
Yes, when she no, actually, as I'm thinking about it, no. I think
Okay.
we've seen, in my mind, I conflated her father with the Mandalorian from Rebels,
Sabine.
Sabine. I
Yeah.
conflated the two,
Okay.
and I'm trying to think back to Satine and whether or
Right.
not we ever saw Satine's mother and father. And no, we don't. We literally find out everything about Satine from Obi-Wan
Yeah.
when he first shows up to uh, work with her. And I don't think we ever see her family. She's already ascended the throne. She's already an important person. We
Okay.
don't see anything prior to that, I believe.
So that leads me to ask the question. Now, have you seen the trailers for this season? I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't seen. Have you been watching the ads for this season
Yeah,
of The
yeah, yeah,
Mandalorian?
yeah. So
Okay.
nothing. I don't mind spoilers. Spoilers don't bother me.
Okay.
I'm going to make my own take on things anyway.
So there's a shot in one of the recent ads that shows, I believe, what is the surface of Mandalore in its glory days. Green pastures and fields, and you see the domed cities that are still intact. Based on what we got of the conversation between Bo-Katan and Din about her father, my theory now, my guess is that we're going to get a flashback to Bo-Katan and her father in their prime. Do you think that's a possibility?
I mean, I would hope so. Like
Yeah.
I have been waiting to see Satine in some way, shape, or
Okay.
form. That would be really
Yeah.
neat to see her off in the corner doing something, and Bo-Katan being really mad because everybody likes Satine better. And, that
Yeah.
would be fun to. I don't mind that kind of stuff. I think that stuff really could have some great connectivity to stuff we've seen previously and stuff we might see down the road. I think that's awesome.
Me too. Very curious to see what that turns out to be. And then the last big thing I want to touch on discussing this episode is the last thing we see. The last thing Bo-Katan sees really is the Mythosaur. And we've heard this creature name dropped a couple times. I remember Kuil the Ugnaught talked about it. Your ancestors
My
rode the
sisters.
Mythosaur.
Hmm.
Yeah,
And he
the
was in the short. The Mythosaur was in the short that Boba Fett was riding
right,
from
right.
the. Like,
The holiday
So yeah,
special.
we've known about this thing
Yeah,
since 1981, right, or 1980. So
right.
long time
S-
ago.
Yeah, and even in the book of Boba Fett, the armorer talks about it, the Mythosaur a little bit. So I kind of, in the back of my head, I kind of knew that we would eventually get to see a Mythosaur. But to you, what is the significance? Obviously, they've got the skull, the skull you see on Boba Fett's shoulder pad that was eventually, kind of retconned into being a Mythosaur skull. But what to you is the significance of the Mythosaur in both the Mandalorian culture and in the Star Wars mythology at large?
I think to the Mandalorians that the Mythosaur is essentially the same thing as a lightsaber blade to a Jedi. That
Uh,
there's such magic that the first time a young Jedi sees a lightsaber, that is the thing that tells them that what they feel in the Force is real,
right.
right? And so they're able to hold on to that their entire lives. Whereas from one standpoint, Din has been searching for the Mythosaur the entire time, and Bo is kind of like, it doesn't exist, dude. What is your problem? Right? It's a joke. It was
Yeah.
something they told us to scare us when we were kids. So, it's like the movie Signs where the character is watching television and then suddenly there's an alien on screen and it's a real thing and he's just so taken aback,
Yeah.
and another person would be like, told you, right?
Right.
So I think that this is that moment where I think you're right. Maybe we are going to see them switch, or maybe
Mm.
they come equal and
Yeah.
they're able to attack the problem because now they're two sides of a bigger whole.
Yeah.
Um, that would be neat, and I do think that that is probably the most important thing because this show and its offshoots have an awful lot of big reptilian creatures. So I'm hoping that we don't have to kill the mythosaur. I hope they leave the poor thing alone with
Right.
Nessie and Loch Ness. Just yes, it's there, great. We don't need to go and fight that thing again because he nearly killed Din. But I do think that that's that moment of we saw mommy kissing Santa Claus, and suddenly it's a real thing.
That was actually the other point that I was going to bring up is I love this ending. Like it's a great cliffhanger ending, and obviously we're having a lot of fun talking about the implications of what this all means. But do you think this would have been even more impactful if we didn't have that battle with the big alligator in the season premiere? Like we've already seen a big aquatic creature. I almost feel like they kind of stole their own thunder a little bit with that. Did you have that feeling as well?
I will tell you that I think I don't think I recognized it in the moment, but I do remember saying, oh, another giant beast, like really. And I had just watched um the Bad Batch with the kaiju on top of the tower,
Right, right.
and I was like, oh my god, and why am I watching, you know, and so I I don't think that they thought that out all the way, but it was neat to see both of them. I
Yeah.
do think that not showing it completely was more impactful than had
Yeah.
they actually shown it. So
No, I loved it. It was like a Loch Ness monster kind of
yeah,
moment.
like
Like you always
ooh,
see those
what did I
footage,
actually
like,
see?
is that a flipper or an eyeball or whatever? Like, yeah, that was great. Sent a chill down my spine. I really love it. I can't wait to see more. Speaking of more, let's talk about the rest of this season. This was episode 2 of season 3. Anything else? So we just have no idea what's coming. There's a few shots in the trailers that we haven't seen yet. I think
Mhm.
we'll be going back to Navarro at some point. Um, I don't know. What else do you think is coming? What are you looking forward to in these remaining 6 episodes, John?
I would like somebody to kick the armorer's ass. I, I'm so sick of her.
Okay.
I'm so sick of that. I'm so sick of poor Din having to prove. I mean, literally, he's the nicest guy in the entire galaxy.
Yeah.
He's dragging around this would-be Jedi Mandalorian Yoda figure all the time. He's trying to help folk. Here's the dark saber. Have it. No, I can't take it from you. Like it's just so crazy that this poor guy has to be burdened on top of all this with this religious dogma.
Mm,
I would really like to see him be able to shed some of that, or at least take what he wants from it
right.
and do something new. You know,
Yeah.
and
I
yeah,
love that. Yeah. I'm of the same mind as you. I really want him to break free of this cult so he can go off and do something different. So I'm crossing my fingers that we get that by the end of this season, and we'll see. It seems like that might be the path that they're going down. But yeah, number one on my list is still Boba Fett and Fennec Shand. I really want them to pop up. I think the Mandalorian owes the book of Boba Fett a couple episodes. So
yes.
at least one, we gotta spend some time with Boba Fett and Fennec Shand. So let's see as we continue through these weeks. Is there anything else you want to say about the Mandalorian before we move on to our final segment, John?
I don't think I would have really expected it to be as successful and engrossing as it eventually became.
Yeah,
The arc of Obi-Wan Kenobi was the arc of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I enjoyed it and I loved every second of it. But it gave me what I needed, right?
yeah,
Whereas um, this is open-ended.
right.
This universe doesn't have an end point. It could keep going.
Yeah,
And the idea that this non-superpowered people have to find some way to get along and to use their weapons appropriately and to band together to try to fix their broken planet. You know, I don't know. Maybe we're getting a nice allegory of the, from the minds of the current Star Wars creatives. Don't you think?
That's interesting. Yeah, as far as the popularity thing goes, I'm on the same page as you there as well. And I was actually thinking about this when the whole discussion of the Book of Boba Fett came up. The fact that a lot of people had not seen that show and were maybe a little confused about what happened with Mando and Grogu over there. And I was thinking, how shocking is it that this series, The Mandalorian, it was titled after a very obscure or fairly obscure, I would say, phrase or terminology in the Star Wars universe. We grew up knowing that Boba Fett had Mandalorian armor, but there wasn't too much more to it than that until you get to Clone Wars and Rebels and stuff. So you take this word Mandalorian and you put it as the title, and it became a household word after that, first of all. But then
you and I knew it,
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but then you release a show based on a character that that has been a household word since The Empire Strikes Back, Boba Fett, and it doesn't necessarily do as well. People aren't watching it as much. That's very strange to me, and it speaks to the amazing accomplishment that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and all the other talented creators, writers, directors, and actors have made with The Mandalorian. So definitely looking forward to more, and we've got plenty more coming up. So that brings us to our final segment here on Who's the Boss. It's called First Steps into a Larger World. This is where we talk about the media that we're consuming and or enjoying outside of Star Wars. My example this week is I had a day free last weekend. I had Sunday free, which has been rare for me lately. So I just sat on my couch or laid on my couch with my cat on my lap and watched 4 of the Best Picture nominees that I hadn't seen yet. Triangle of Sadness, Tar, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Top Gun Maverick. So I am catching up. I have one left. It's called Women Talking. I think we're going to watch that on Saturday before the Oscars on Sunday. So I'll have seen all the Best Picture nominees. I enjoyed these in varying levels. I think of the 4 that I watched this weekend, Triangle of Sadness was my favorite. It's a very dark satire about the class system. So if you're into that kind of thing, I'd say check it out. Tar is also very good. It's sort of a fake biopic about a character that doesn't really exist in real life, but Cate Blanchett is wonderful in it. How about you, John? What have you been consuming, reading, watching, playing, anything like that lately?
Well, I'm of the opinion that when you're writing or when you're trying to enjoy your passions, you have to fill up with other stuff. So I've taken this break. I had taken this break with Star Wars stuff. So I went back to a lot of my World War II knowledge and wanted to learn more. And so I've watched 2 or 3 amazing World War II flicks that came from outside the United States. The first one that I would recommend to everyone is called Narvik, and it's about the Nazis' first defeat in Europe.
Is this a documentary?
No, it is a true, based on true stories. Film set in Norway, and Norwegians fighting against the Nazis, and the main character is a woman who has to make choices that are not going to be pleasing to either side. Amazing flick. You need to go and watch that. The other the World War II one that I watched was called The Forgotten Battle, and that is again another this time from it's a Dutch film with English overtones about what's happening as the Nazis are trying to leave that country but are being attacked at the same time, and what happens to the civilian population. The young man who played Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies has a big part in this one, and he's excellent. Third, and just for fun, just enjoy the heck out of it, just grab some popcorn and laugh a little bit too, is called Viking Wolf. Yet another Norwegian flick, but this one is about werewolves in the great untamed north. And then finally, I went and saw Marlowe. Now, I'm a huge noir fan. I
Hmm.
love noir flicks. I enjoy noir novels. I especially enjoy Raymond Chandler. If you have watched or read or enjoyed anything that's based on Chandler, you will enjoy Marlowe. I
This is with
really
Liam
enjoyed it.
Neeson, right?
Yes, yes, and you can ignore all that because Marlowe as a character transcends the many people who have played him, whether it's um, in Peter. Yeah, and he's been played by I think 6 different men,
Okay.
and this particular one does a fairly good job. And the plot of the movie is jumping right out of the fiction that was written back in the 30s and 40s. It's excellent. I really
Okay.
enjoyed it. Not everyone will like it. If you have never watched a black and white picture, as an adult in the 2020s, do not go see Marlowe. You're not going to like it. If you've never enjoyed a mystery novel, do not go see Marlowe. You're not going to like it.
Yeah.
But if you've ever enjoyed, you know, The Maltese Falcon, you
Uh-huh.
know, uh, The Big Lebowski,
Yeah.
which is a sort of a neo noir,
Yes.
meandering Chandlerian plot, you will
Absolutely.
enjoy Marlowe, and you'll get a big kick out of it. So
Speaking of noir-ish detective stories, that HBO series Perry Mason started up again this week. I have not watched the new episode, but very much looking forward to catching up on that. Did you watch the previous season of that?
I got about 3/4 of the way through, and then somebody told me I had to write a whole lot of stuff about Star
Okay.
Wars for a bit, so I
Okay.
have to finish it. I will tell you that the darkness that I encounter on the screen often invades my soul, so I can only do so much at any given time
Yeah. No, I
without
know I
having,
know what you mean.
like I need to all right, I
Yeah.
need to actually watch something funny now, or
Happy and
else I'm
fun.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm with you
yeah.
on that. I definitely understand that. Okay, that's going to bring us to the end of this week's episode of Who's the Boss. Big thanks to my guest coming back again, John Bishop Jr. John, thank you so much for taking, over an hour and a half to chat with me about Star Wars. I always love talking to you about Star Wars. You have so many wonderful insights and observations. So really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. I enjoy talking with a like-minded person who doesn't seem to be swayed by the foibles of social media and/or really picky jerks. So
I
I
try not
enjoy,
to. I try not to.
yeah,
Yeah.
I enjoyed being able to talk and have opinions without feeling like I'm going to get yelled at. So appreciate it.
God, I would never yell at you, sir. I've never yelled at anyone
No.
on this show. I don't think, unless it was in jest. I've yelled at people in jest, I think. Where could people, do you want people to find you, first of all? And if so, where can they
Oh
find
yeah,
you?
I'm still comment on everything I like to comment on, which bops between Red Sox baseball, the Scouts BSA, and Star Wars. I'm most easy to find on Twitter at Twitter/JM Bishop Jr. Easy to
Okay.
find me there, and I'm sure that your handle has retweeted me a couple times, and,
Yeah.
and people can find me easily there. And then when I do start writing up about Star Wars, which I hope to do at some point in the future, I'll make sure everybody knows where to go. And I do want to give a plug to my friends at Mickey Blog and the Diz Insider. They were incredible to me, allowed me to pursue my passion for several years at a clip, and it was just so much fun, and they were so gracious and wonderful, and allowed me to do things like this.
Sweet. Yeah. Thank you for plugging them. And I enjoyed your work over there as well. And again, thank you again for your time and your insights. So next week on Who's the Boss, it's more The Mandalorian and more of The Bad Batch with episodes 3 and 13 of this season, respectively. Please visit laughingplace.com for all your Disney news and opinions. And I am also on Twitter at Who's the Boss Pod. That's going to wrap it up for this week's episode of Who's the Boss. Thank you out there for listening. See you next time. Bye.